Welcome to 10 More Questions, a podcast lovingly created by the people of Nice Work, a company building and activating brands for rebels, dreamers, and pioneers that people actually care about. It's no secret that you need a strong brand, but what exactly does building one entail? And how can you ensure that your brand both stands out and supports your business? In 10 More Questions, we explore the relationship between business and brand, chatting to thought and industry leaders about how exactly to turn a brand from a cost center to a company asset. As always, I'm your host, Ross Drakes. Today's guest is Waldo Waldman. He's a Hall of Fame leadership speaker. He's an executive coach. He's the author of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Never Fly Solo. He's a graduate of the Air Force Academy. Waldo helps leaders and organizations accelerate performance in highly competitive and changing environments. Waldo overcame massive claustrophobia and fear of heights to become a combat-decorated fighter pilot with over 65 combat missions. He believes the key to building a culture of trust lies with your wingmen, those who help you overcome obstacles, adapt to change, and achieve success. In business and life, you should never fly solo. Waldo is also the founder of the Wingman Foundation, whose mission is to build funds and awareness for veterans in need. Welcome to the show, Waldo.
Great to be here, Ross.
I found you on LinkedIn, which is the strangest place to find people, but one of the things that I really resonated with was how committed you are to your identity, how clear it is. It's one of the clearest sort of brand identities I've ever seen in a human. I'm not even talking about the sort of visual assets of it, just how you embody who you are and how you bring that to the world. Like, how did you stumble upon this thread of never flying solo, being a wingman, and doing it for, I think, 20, 30 years? Like, how did you end up here?
So it's an evolution of life and experiences and of character and relationships. You know, when I spent time in the military, obviously I was a fighter pilot and learned about the concept of teamwork and wingmen and trust and collaboration, flying that F-16 that's over my shoulder. And then I went into the business world, was in high-tech sales, and then mergers and acquisition consulting, mostly commission only most of my career, and then weaned my way into speaking and caught the entrepreneurial bug. I think you've caught that bug as well, Ross. I know you work with Nike and some big companies, but you know, when you find yourself in the cockpit, kind of by yourself, one of my philosophies is like, you may be in the cockpit by yourself, but you're really not flying solo. You have relationships, you have partners, you have people in your life who can lift you up, inspire you, get you on the right path, who can consult you, who can create a perspective that you may not see while sitting in the cockpit. So the metaphor, the analogy of flying in jets kind of very much resonated with me, not just from the flying side, but from the relationship side, the collaboration side, the fact that we're not doing it on our own. So Never Fly Solo was a byproduct of so many conversations, so many interactions of people who said yes to me and who also said no to me, who rejected me, but then coached me up and lifted me up and improved my perspective. And so I always believe that we're on the backs of heroes and people who have provided us insights, and that we're not flying solo. And that one relationship, that one conversation, that one podcast, that one connection could be all you need to take your life to the next level. So that's kind of where it all started. But it definitely wasn't just in the cockpit. It was in the flight line of life.
I love that. I mean, how do we help lots of people, and one of the reasons that we create shows like this is to sort of, we can, as a company, we can only work with a certain number of people. But, if we create these conversations, it can reach many more people. How did you know that you'd landed on the right thing? How did you know that this was the identity that you wanted to back and invest so much time and energy and effort in carrying through multiple sort of stages of your life and career, and to sort of back it up.
And so it has to resonate with you energetically, spiritually, whatever it is, the wingman philosophy, which I trademarked as a trusted partner in business and life. I didn't trademark and brand it in the fighter pilot world, but in the business world. And I noticed in the early 2000s when I first started this going, and then 2008, 2010, Southwest Airlines started using it. Some big pizza companies started using Never Fly Solo. It wasn't in my space of leadership speaking, consulting, and coaching, but I saw it resonating, and wingman became very, very prominent. I think it's a very common term these days. And I'd like to say that I was an impetus with speaking 80 to 100 times a year and all the interactions in my book, Never Fly Solo, that it kind of got it out into the ether. So when you start seeing people using the phraseology that you've kind of put into the universe, it's kind of saying, yeah, things are probably working. But also, is it memorable and is it repeatable, right? So I use the term wingman, but then the last 7 or 8 years, I created wingmom, right? Wingman, M-A-M, Mike, Alpha Mike, for the people. This diversity is a big part of society these days, so I didn't want to alienate the women. So we don't say wingmams in the Air Force, but in life, hey, I was just on a sales call this morning with a client of mine who I've been interacting with, and she's like, well, my wingman, Sabrina, she's got to get together with me, so that the verbiage is sticky.
Yes.
My wing mom, right? When I'm speaking with salespeople, I talk about never selling solo, like we need teams, et cetera, which is probably going to be the name of a future book, right? And so it has to resonate one-on-one, and it also has to get the person to say, that's interesting, tell me more. I get it intrinsically, but relate it to me, right? So if it's difficult to understand on the cover, on the exterior level, it's going to be harder to understand on the internal level when you go deeper. But if people are like, wow, interesting, tell me more. So that's kind of how I knew it was kind of resonating. And I've been in this business 23 years, and I'm still sticky and relevant, and getting into a space, with relationships and trust and courage and some of those universal principles I talk about, they'll never go out of style. And so I've been very intentional about that as well. I think most people need to think of how their messaging, their product, their phrase kind of can be universal and relate across multiple industries and across, multiple demographics as well.
I mean, there's so much in there. Our whole business is about making people care. And the reality is people can't care about anything unless they can attach importance to it. And the way people attach importance is with relevance. They go, I can see how this affects my life, or someone I care about, or something that I have emotional investment in. And as soon as you can cross that thing of what I'm doing to, you can go, I can see how this can solve something in my life or help me achieve something that I'm pushing towards. And how you tie it back to those kind of universal human things. I had the honor of interviewing Michael Wolff, who's a branding genius of 80 years. And I asked him the question, I was like, what is a brand? And he was like, well, a brand just needs to touch people, needs to make them sort of feel something. And it's that. Yeah. It's those universal truths. It's Homer's Odyssey. It's the stories from thousands of years ago, trading on those same things: fear, insecurity, happiness, joy, connection. All of these things are what makes people actually feel something. And therefore, if you can tap into that, you're speaking on a layer deeper than just the sort of marketing noise that so many people rely on.
Yeah, that's well said. And in that emotional context, that I call it the marinade to the mind, right? And to get to the head, you got to go through the heart. Your feeling is inspired in your heart. And so when I speak, and I have a pretty intense personality at times, I'm very compassionate. I share deep stories of failure and fear and courage and inspiration in my books and in my live keynotes and presentations. So if you have a brand and it's on a flat surface, like the color, the emotional context has to be related from the human, on the human side. So as you're speaking, as you're resonating or not with your audience, it has to inspire some type of feeling so that it gets into their heart. And I say that because, and I mentioned this to you before when we discussed, I believe when it comes to branding and creating content and an emotional feeling with people, you have to be a mint chocolate chip brand in a vanilla chocolate world. And what I mean by that is vanilla and chocolate are pretty plain. They're the original flavors for that matter, right? But when you go to the supermarket, there are all these different flavors that relate to certain types of people. And if you can relate a certain flavor, a certain personality, a certain nuance and energy to a certain crowd, they will be attracted to you. And so I like to be mint chocolate chip. That's my favorite ice cream, right? And so if people like mint chocolate chip, high energy, emotion, aviation, that excitement and thrill, then they're going to love me. But guess what? Some people love mint chocolate chip and some people hate it. You put mint and chocolate in front of their nose, they're going to throw up. They will not have anything to do with it. And so you have to be willing to potentially risk alienating a certain segment of a market in order to fully attract and resonate with others. You don't want to be vanilla or chocolate. You don't want to be, they're pretty good. I can see working with them. You ideally want them to say definitely yes and potentially risk the definitely no's. And that's how you build a brand that's unique in a certain demographic. And if you're lucky, like an Apple or a Nike or some of these other big universal brands, you can have a much bigger demographic to work with. But most of us, hey, we got to find that little sliver of society where we can go deep and wide, or deep and wide if we can, but better to go deep and narrow and just own that little sliver, even though it's a minute portion. But if it's going to drive awareness and sales and a profitable business, go for the narrow, be mint chocolate chip.
Yes, but I mean, I think I 100% agree with you, and we have this debate with our clients. I think there's this nervousness of like, but what about all the other people that I'm now sort of not going to speak to because I'm choosing this little sort of thing? And if you've read Phil Knight's book Shoe Dog, I mean, they started as a running brand. They weren't the behemoth that was everything for everyone doing any kind. I mean, they're probably in 150 different sports. But when they started, it was all for runners, because he understood runners and he knew what the problem was and he knew what the emotional points were and he knew what people were trying to achieve and he knew. And then once he'd solved running, well, not solved it, but once he'd kind of figured out how to play in that running world, he was then like, well, you know what? Tennis is very similar, and the mentality of tennis is similar. The challenges and the technology might be different, but the people are trying to achieve almost the same thing. And that's when they started to go, okay, let's go to tennis and let's go to football and and now they sort of expanding into all these different things and have this sort of legacy of 50 years of amazing branding that they kind of lean on. But I believe if you niche, like you're saying, if you find that space and you tap into those universal human things, you get adjacency. You can move out of one, like you've moved through multiple industries, but also, when we spoke, you were like, I can speak to sales teams, but I can also speak to product teams, and I can also speak to, because the mentality is different. The mentality is the same. The context might be completely different, but you can carry those truths from one space into another quite clearly.
So it just depends on where you are in your product cycle, where you are in your business cycle, how long you've been around, how profitable you are, where you're at, your ability to spend on marketing, resources, digital, or whatever. So I think it's better to niche your brand, not your topic or your demographic. Niching your brand means you're unique, you're a distinct flavor. But if you can attract people across multiple markets, that's ideal. But so let me give you an example. When I first started out, when you first start out, I think it's good to go where you're an absolute expert in. I coach a lot of speakers and they want to attack every market. And so if there is, somebody who's very, very, she wants to talk on leadership and innovation, and she wants to just speak generically across any sector. But if she was a past nurse, an emergency room nurse, or in healthcare, hey, why not focus in on that niche? You're teaching universal principles, but now you're marketing, you're segmenting, you're branding to that specific niche. You're building up your cachet of clients, your experience, your reputation, your testimonials, your social proof. Now you can go beyond healthcare into manufacturing, et cetera. And so when I coach speakers, I try to find out where they have experience and resonance in a certain market with their universal principle. And rather than casting a wide net, cast that narrow net and be the expert in this niche and then build it out. Others are very generic and go broad and then eventually narrow into a market. That's a little bit harder to do, I think, than the other way around, or it may be easier, just depending on where you are and how you're marketing yourself. And so my brand, my content of Never Fly Solo, collaboration, trust, all the imagery that I use, always aviation related, right? And I'm always showing demographics and different pictures of the military and the fighter pilot world. And also, I probably should have worn my flight suit, which I speak in. It's got Never Fly Solo patch. It's got my wingman logo. And so everything I do is wrapped around and reinforcing the Never Fly Solo and wingman brand, which are kind of married to each other. And obviously Waldo, my nickname, my call sign, we want to hire Waldo, that wingman guy, whoever the wingman is. Oh yeah, the guy who wrote Never Fly Solo, and then I have statements, push it up. I have comments and audience interaction and phrases that I use that reinforce it all as well. So the language, if you can build it, is also critical, where you're building brand loyalists that understand your language and share that as well. And that's hard to do. And I have been fortunate to have done that. A lot of people remember, push it up, which is full power, full commitment. And people that have seen me in the past, they'll see me in the airport and say, "Hey, Waldo, push it up," or they'll show me photos of people doing push it up. It's a hang loose sign, whatever. So anything you could do to reinforce your brand. Now, as a speaker, as a thought leader, as a personality, a little harder to do or a little easier to do than a shoe company or a drink company, right? So, stay thirsty, my friends, whatever that alcohol commercial with the beer or, certain taglines people remember. But I there's a lot of different things based on your brand, but language and personality are tools to get to the heart, as you said before, because that draws the emotion and creates change and mindset.
Yeah, I fully agree. I just want to remind the audience, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat and we can answer them. But, Waldo, I want to get to one of the topics that we talked about, because it's sort of related to this. You're very good at personalization. I think a lot of people, you're not the only human using sort of military metaphor and history and cadence to sort of stand on a stage, but you seem to have a sense of trying to understand who's in the room and how can you, instead of just showing up as you, the raw, unfiltered version of yourself, there's a context that you show up with, which, I think allows people to then engage better and drop their guard, and actually listen and participate, because there's a relevance in the personalization. How do you can you share with the audience how you think about that, and what are the tools and tips that you do to sort of customize what you do depending on the situation that you're stepping into?
So look, my job is on a stage in front of 50 or 15,000 audience members, right? And they want to know that this guy did just show up winging it, right? I have a saying, wingmen never wing it. Another brand or another reinforcer. We don't fly by the seat of your pants. You can't sell or lead by the seat of your pants. You have to be relevant. You have to be prepared. And this goes to delivering a presentation on stage where I'm interacting the night before with the audience, or in the gym that morning, or at breakfast, talking to some of the folks in the audience, getting to know them, their family, their issues, their challenges, if they're new to the group or new to the association or organization. And then I have intelligence briefings, once again, a little military metaphor, to, with their leaders 2 or 3 weeks prior to the event, learning about their challenges, their language, their core values. I'm asking for photos of some of their quote unquote unsung heroes, who are the people in the audience or in their business who were behind the scenes helping out, right? I was speaking for 2,000 prison corrections officers in Reno, Nevada, a few weeks ago. actually last week, last Wednesday. At the night before, there was a big party. There was a big 80s theme, and it was fun as heck, right? And I want to see if I could pull this up because you'll laugh at it. And just to show the truth behind what I'm saying here, because it's funny as heck. Let me see if I could find this guy. So I took a photo of one of the folks that was dancing at the party. Okay. I'm going to show it to you right here. Here he is right there. You see him on the screen?
Yes.
Right? He's got that flock of seagulls hair. I'm a big 80s fan, and he dressed up and played the part. If you know Mike Score, Flock of Seagulls, and I ran, right? So I took a photo of him. His name was James. I'm sorry, William. His real name was Bill. His name was William, and he was a corrections officer. So during the program, when I was having him push it up and talking about complacency, I showed a photo of him, and I said, by the way, and these are corrections officers. I said, by the way, does anybody know this guy? And I showed the picture of him. The cops have been looking at him all day, looking for him all day, right? And, I think he had a couple too many drinks last night, but talk about commitment, wearing the flock of seagulls hair and playing the role. Anyway, they absolutely loved it. It was relevant to them the night before, and I connected with that one person. I showed all. So going above and beyond, relevance is also about being immediate and connecting to the dynamics of the group and going that extra level. In the morning, I'll look at the local newspaper or look what's going on in the news, or I'll Google the press releases for that organization and try to make a tie-in. Hey, the stock market in the US is a bit crazy because the tariffs may be, we have to pay back the tariffs. And so the Trump administration is dealing with a lot of change, and that's going to impact many companies positively and negatively. And so when I'm talking with a sales prospect, understanding their industry, looking at their press releases, going to their LinkedIn profiles and learning about the fact that Cassie was with the company 15 years and Mark was with them for 5, and they're both in Atlanta, Georgia, like me. We're building that connection, the rapport, the humanity, the relevance, and the trust. And so your brand ultimately has to really display this trust, this connection. Will he or she, or will the company follow through with their promises? And if you're able to do those small things to bridge the gap, to make the connection to the heart, to have them feel that they could trust you and that you know them, now you're progressing along the sales and value chain from the stage on a sales call, perhaps in a podcast. And before we spoke, hey, I was on your website and learned a little bit about you. You work with, Nike and the inventors of the hamburger, I believe, right? And the food service restaurant industry, right? And so I want to respect the audience. So when you respect the audience, you build rapport, you enhance trust. And hey, this is a brand we can trust, because a freaking logo color or a mission statement doesn't mean crap. They need to trust that you're able to come through with them. And that's one thing that's allowed me to be relevant over 23 years. And you pay a fee for that. You command your fee, you don't demand it. When you command a higher fee, they have high expectations. If you can deliver on it, more power to you, baby.
I love that. I mean, as you were talking, you reminded me of, we did a rebrand from quite a big organization, and they were doing a big internal conference of 5,500 people arriving at this conference. Part of the big thing was the CEO unveiling this new brand, and part of the process, we interviewed a whole bunch of people, and they edited a video together that was 18 minutes long of their people talking about the company. And I got this completely wrong. I was going to war with them. I was like, guys, we can't put an 18-minute video on the stage. A sitcom is 22 minutes long, and people pick up their phone 5 minutes into a sitcom. There's no way that people are going to sit through this thing at the event. And the CEO just stuck with it. He was like, we're putting this thing on, we're putting it on, we're putting it on. And we played it. And you know what? Every single person in that room watched that video from beginning to end. They were crying, they were laughing, they were clapping, because it was about them.
Yes.
It was about them. It wasn't a brand video about some hypothetical thing. It was about them, the people building that company, doing that thing, what they felt, what was important to them. And we all have an infinite appetite to hear about that stuff. We all have an infinite. If my boy comes to me and wants to tell me a story about his day, I have hours. Like I will listen to him all day long because that's one of the most relevant things in my life. And I think, what you're talking about there is that there's this thing that people often miss. It's a super simple thing of if you say a person's name, if you remember their name, if you know something about them, they instantaneously push you up 4 or 5 levels in their understanding, okay, let me actually listen to Waldo a little bit more because he said something about me. Like there's a weight that comes with these things, and it's not difficult to do in today's day and age. It's one of those things that's easy to say. It's easy to say, but people don't always do it.
But even look at on LinkedIn, and it's such a great commentary, Ross. If you look on LinkedIn, we get these cold emails, even the emails that we get that wind up in our spam because it's going through some crazy CRM and they're spitting out this generic automated AIs possibly email. The ones that I watch, and the reason why I have a decent following, almost 30,000 folks on LinkedIn, which may not be a lot, but I have people that I really have relationships with. And when I reach out to them, or even somebody, I want to connect with somebody on LinkedIn, I'll Google them. I'll learn a little bit more about them. I'll find a common wingman or wingmam in their network. And I'll send a note, send them something special and particular and relevant about them. Or if I'm trying to mention something about an upcoming engagement and it's a cold prospect. I never bold call or bold connect on LinkedIn. I'm always doing a little bit of research. They want to know that you know a little bit about them, that you went out of your way to build that connection. It may not always work, but it removes the barrier of trust. And it connects you more. And the ones that listen to me, this guy, Jordan Howard, he moved from Atlanta. It was actually in Vietnam, and then just moved to Portugal. He's my web designer. He cold emailed me or bold emailed me on LinkedIn with a video of my site sharing specific things on how he could help me. It wasn't just the beginning that was customized and the rest of it was some generic BS. He invested time knowing that he can get maybe a $10,000 or $15,000 client by building that connection and having me say, interesting, tell me more. And he earned the right to get on that call. And my audiences earned the right, or I earned the right with my audiences to get them to listen to another 5 or 10 minutes of me before they're back on their phone. And you earned the right to build those relationships and connections. It reduces and removes and eliminates the barriers and facilitates the trust, which continuously needs to be earned and reinforced and baked in until that relationship is more solidified. So I'm saying this because your listeners may not be speakers or brand builders or whatever. They may be folks on LinkedIn where we met trying to build that next client or reinforce a relationship or share a video or some marketing material that respects their prospects and hopefully garners them business in the world,
It's obviously resonating when people are asking if there's more tips. Like, what are your sort of top tips for personalizing, or how do you show that you really know someone that you actually don't really know? You've never met them before, but what are some of the tips and tricks that you do there?
No, you were asking me.
Yeah, well, no, Heidi's asking you.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. So Heidi. So okay. So once again, Google and ChatGPT or any of these things are very, very important. And so a lot of times there's a lot of information out there on people that you may not even think is available out there, right? I look at previous posts that they've done on social media, and they may not be on Instagram or LinkedIn, maybe Facebook. I could track them down, find some sense of relevance. And then I start garnering some trust. Hey, comment on their posts. If they show a picture of a dog, for example, today, company IDI Logistics had a sales call this morning. I was mentioning the sound of freedom, Air Force engines and jets. And she's like, oh, my dog would freak out. My dog goes crazy when he hears jets. And I'm like, what kind of dog you got? Oh, it's a chocolate lab pit bull mix. And so I'm like, oh, I love them. I had a black lab in the past, blah, blah, blah. Well, I've got a Great Dane. And I was showing her pictures of my Great Dane. And she's like, I love Great Danes. And she's like, you got me. And then I showed her a picture of my Great Dane and my 2 cats, right? And she's like, I've got 2 cats as well. You won me over, right? And so once again, being present in the conversations and finding that quick little image, and I'll show you the picture of Willie that I pulled off the screen, right? There's my dog and the 2 cats at the top, right? And so in the conversations or in the posts, in the social media, Maybe you reply, here's a picture of my wing dog. Love your lab. And oh, who's this guy, right? Making a relevant comment on something that they're interested in. And then not immediately, quote unquote, selling them, but building the relationship, garnering some trust, making the connection, helping them out, perhaps, right? Best way you want to earn a referral is to be a referral. So a lot of times I'm helping people get jobs. I've got a lot of executives on LinkedIn, people that are searching, making introductions, helping. So all those things to think outside your cockpit of ways that I connect with people, find out about them. Social media obviously is a great way, but being very, very present in the immediacy of the conversation. So there's always opportunities for you to make that synapse fire and create that emotional feeling, which once again goes back to what we were saying before, which is the epitome of a brand. How do they feel when they connect with you, when they talk with you, when they communicate with you?
I mean, as you're talking, I was thinking there's a woman on LinkedIn, her name's Lily. She's a PR human. Her job is to get humans onto shows like mine, and she showed up a month and a half before she asked for anything. She was commenting on the show, and not just little comments. She was like, oh, I really enjoyed in this episode this thing, and asking sort of pointed questions. And so when she sent me a guest referral, she was like, I think you should interview Tom. I wasn't like, I'm not going to talk to this person at all. It's like, I recognize that name, she's actually thought about it. So now when she's telling me that I should speak to this person, like you say, I trust a little bit more that it's not that. I mean, I've got a show that's for members of the Entrepreneurs Organization. It's interviews with people of the organization. And someone emailed me and I got the perfect guest for you. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Are they a member of this organization? No. I was like, well, then they're not the perfect guest for me. And I don't think you've even spent the time looking at my thing. So, they're the two very different approaches.
Yes.
And Lily's managed to get 4 guests on my shows over the years. And this other person whose name I can't remember has been unable to get a single one. And that's the sort of difference is creating that with people.
It's critical, and it takes a little bit more time because these days with the automation tools available to us, we can cast a wider net, and then you could piss off a lot more people, but you're likely going to alienate. That's why it's like, I may not cast as wide of a web. It may take more time for me to do that research and connect and build that relationship and garner that trust. But if people are out there, like we get the LinkedIn connection, and then the next email you get the next day, if not the next minute, is some pitch on how they could do this and that for you, and to click here to set up an appointment. I'm like, we're not setting up appointments. We haven't even got to know each other a little bit. And so I'm losing patience. I think most people are losing their patience when we get commoditized and trapped. So I don't like when it happens to me. So I sure as heck, I'm not going to do it to other people and invest the time. And I don't need, a net full of a million minnows. I just need a few, big tunas. Right. And that's how my business operates. I don't go for massive clients. I want only a select few that pay a good fee and take it from there. So once again, it depends on your business model, but be careful if your brand is automated, lacking connection, lacking heart and emotion. And if you're not going to put in the time, as I often reply when I'm in a pissed off mood and I want to say something, I'm like, if your level of relevance and connection is as generic as this mass emailed the delivery through LinkedIn, I don't really want to do business with somebody like that. Goes back to my buddy Jordan Howard, who I hired, and the other people, videographers, etc., who go out of their way to craft something, put 10 or 30 minutes of invested time in to say, yes, I am mint chocolate chip or mocha almond fudge. Hope you like that flavor, Waldo. Let's continue the conversation, right? If not, you're just going to alienate folks, and your reputation and your brand will be diminished or elevated. Because guess what happens when you got a great elevated brand? People start referring you, and you could sit back and let the universe and the ecosystem be your biggest marketing tool.
I see Jess is asking the question now that it sounds like a lot of time and effort. How do you deal with scale? Like, how do you scale something like that? Maybe for yourself, a speaker, you don't, like you said, you don't need 1 million customers. How do you do that at a point that is scalable?
Well, it's a great question, because initially in my business, I was doing a lot more outbound, a lot more investing, researching. I bold called it a lot. I bold called it because I called with confidence. I emailed with confidence. I did my investigation. And now, as I just mentioned, people are referring me, right? Your automated marketing kind of takes off because your prospects, or most importantly, your customers and clients, are your best ecosystem. So now it's a matter of putting content out there, leveraging social media, LinkedIn, YouTube videos. If you're using mailers, right? Like what's old is now new. Like, how many people have sent out a postcard, a big mailer? I've got some postcards I can share. It's buried away, but I'll send out postcards once in a while to some of these prospects. And you want to just keep the radar sweeping, right? And using some automation that's earned because you already built the relationship. You don't want to automate initially, but when it comes to relationship building as opposed to marketing, you got to do the research. So now I'm talking to a woman actually in South Africa. Alan is her name, L-E-M. And I'm likely going to hire her as a digital consultant. Hopefully she doesn't see this in case I don't hire her. But she's been following up, doing sample memes for me, with a quote and some images. The stuff that she sent initially wasn't to brand, so I coached her a little bit, and she's going to be sending me some updates. So I want her to help me scale. Alan, here are the ideal prospects I want you to reach out to. Do a little research, find out about some companies, and here's maybe a list of 10. Send them a note, tell them you work with Waldo Waldman, the wingman. You noticed that he or she did business with him 5 years ago, or they're partners with whatever. We figure it out. And so she can be a conduit to me and help me scale and be a wingman and leverage some more connections, not inauthentically, but through me. Hey, I'd love to set up a meeting with Waldo and talk a little bit more how we can help such and such organization with your recent acquisition or whatever. So I got to train her, invest in that conduit, that extra weapon system to help me scale. And scaling to me is leveraging my time. So for me, if I'm spending all this time prospecting and not writing, creating a video, customizing a presentation, then it's not a good effective use of my time. So it really depends on where you're at in your business cycle, because sometimes, guess what? 14, 16-hour day, grinding it out is how you're going to eventually scale, right? There are no shortcuts. You got to do the work before the reputation and the referrals start coming in, and then you could start investing in other people who can help you scale, but not as robots, but as human connectors who are, and I'll leave it at this, analogous and connected to your brand. So if me, wingman, is trusted partner in life, and I'm sending out some commoditized wingman who's sending garbage out and automated emails, that's not garnering trust into me, the product they're trying to sell. So whoever you're hiring must emulate and reinforce the brand that you believe in. And if they're not doing that, not a good hire, because the whole value chain, the whole communication chain and value chain is going to be critical along that until you close and deliver an invoice.
Yeah, I think it's, you speak sense. I think it's interesting, I guess turning back the question on Jess is the scale comes later. I think a lot of people want the scale to come today. It's almost like we need to build some things and then you scale. I think similar to the Nike story, there's lots of them. There's all these things that like sort of are super focused and very small, and then they reach a certain point and then scale becomes an easier thing to do because people are now, they're bought in, bought in long before you've kind of reached out to them, which is a much easier thing to do.
Very true, Ross. Yeah.
So although I want to, I'm aware of time, and I want to get to, you've talked a lot about evolution and relevance, and you've fallen into that trap of you've got this amazing brand and this catchphrase and this, these things that people resonate with. But how do you iterate that into the future? Like, how do you build on top of that? So you're not just, I saw him 10 years ago and he was saying the same things, doing the same thing. Talk about your next sort of iteration and how you see yourself sort of building on top of what you've got to build the next sort of chapter.
Yeah, and this is so important because sometimes the content can get a little stale. You're out there, Never Fly Solo or Wingman. Okay, I heard them, or maybe not, and you may not have that sense of curiosity in the marketplace as I may have 10, 15 years ago. And so one of the things that differentiate me with my brand and who I am as a speaker, as a human being, and not just as a fighter pilot and combat veteran, is I overcame massive claustrophobia as a fighter pilot. I almost died 3 years into my 11-year flying career, developed PTSD from that, and eventually was developing anxiety and panic attacks in a fighter jet. Imagine being claustrophobic, people that are listening, and being strapped in for 6 hours in a tiny little F-16 cockpit, barely able to move, and knowing you got 6 hours of flight ahead of you at night in Iraq getting shot at. Like, it would cause anybody who's anxiety, has any level of anxiety and claustrophobia to probably freak out just thinking of that. So I did that for 8 out of my 11-year flying careers. I decided to strap into this plane, into this tiny little cockpit, and face my fear and overcome my anxiety and phobia. 65 combat missions. And so I shared that story to certain people in certain groups over the last 5 years, and I was tapping into a little bit more. But the more I shared about it, in particular after COVID, where people were in the hangar of doubt, anxiety, uncertainty in the world, that's still prevalent today as we see the chaos going on in Ukraine and Israel and the economy and all this stuff. Uncertainty and fear are becoming more and more prevalent. And so my next book, I just signed a contract 2 weeks ago.
Well done.
It's going to be coming out in the fall, and it's called Commit. And it's about breaking your fear barrier, crushing uncertainty, and achieving all you can be in your life. That last segment I'm still working on. But it's about the humanity, the human component behind the fighter pilot, behind the peak performer, behind the leader, how we all have anxiety and uncertainty and fears and doubts to deal with, and what we need to do to commit fully. And so the reason why it's called Commit is that's what we said to each other in combat when we were crossing the border. If this is the border and we're flying together, when we approach the border and we're ready to cross it, I'd say, Ross, commit, meaning arm your weapons, cool your missile, tighten down the lap belt, push up the throttle. We're crossing into enemy territory, buddy, and you better be ready because somebody's trying to kill us, and it's going down. There's no turning back.
Commit.
And so that's the analogy there. So that's going to be my next book. And so what does it take to get to that point where you're fully committed, to start the podcast, to be the entrepreneur, to pick up the phone, to ask for marriage, to potentially go through a divorce or lose 30 pounds? What does it take? What are the things that are holding you back before you cross that border and execute? And so that's the next iteration on my life. And as I'm 57 years old, I got a 14-year-old who dealt with some health challenges. I've been through a lot of life issues, different than I dealt with outside the cockpit. Hopefully this is going to relate more to the people who are in the dungeon of doubt, who need that tool, that inspiration, that mindset shift, or that relationship to say, I've got the courage, I'm pushing up the throttle, I'm fully committing. And that's the next rendition of Waldo Waldman, the human, not Waldo Waldman, the speaker, the fighter pilot, or coach.
That's super cool, dude. And I look forward to reading the book. I look forward to seeing you in person. Jess says, commit.
Commit. That's going to be the new tagline. You remember this, Ross, because that's going to be the phrase that pays, right?
Okay, commit.
Interesting. Tell me more, right? That's the brand. Push up the throttle, make it happen. So you're my first, basically, I think my first podcast since signing my book deal. And so
I love that. We get the exclusive scoop, our first ever exclusive scoop. I love that. Waldo, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your experience. And with that, that's it for this week. But we'll be back with more business and branding in the next episode. So subscribe to get this. And thank you to all our live guests who showed up. So if you want to ask questions and have them answered in real time, you can sign up for our next interview. In the meantime, we'd appreciate it if you'd like or share this episode with somebody in your network who needs it, or leave a review. It's the best way to help us reach more people. 10 More Questions is brought to you by Nice Work. We're dedicated to help people and businesses make a dent in the world through brands that people actually care about. Thank you for listening. And until next time, bye-bye.